Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning for a topic that's intriguing to most of us, but we don't know very much about. I'm Gretchen Batra from the mountains of Western North Carolina. I'm an AARP volunteer, and today we're really excited to have David Kirkman, um, who's also an AARP volunteer now, but he's retired from the North Carolina Attorney General's office, where he worked for 3 decades on protecting elders around fraud. And in fact, as a result of his work, he's written the book. Let's see here. There you go. Elder Fraud Wars, and here you can both see it
In
now.
stereo.
Yeah. Lots of his stories about what actually happened during his tenure with the Attorney General's office. So it's very, very interesting. And today we're talking about the dark web, and it's really become a prominent issue. I pulled a couple articles last week from USA Today. There was an article about $175 million demanded in reported ransomware attack, and this was against the Allergy Partners. Maybe you saw that in the paper. And also, I was intrigued to find out this article about John McAfee. He created the antivirus software, and he was indicted in federal court for fraud and money laundering conspiracy, alleging that he and others made over $13 million by fooling investors zealous over the emerging cryptocurrency market. And so all of this probably relates to the dark web. So David, what is the dark web?
Well, the dark web is a tiny portion of what we know as the internet. And if you view the internet sort of as an iceberg, there's only about 1/5 of it that you see above the waterline. And that's what we can search using Google or Bing or other search engines. And then below the waterline is about 80% of the internet, things that are hidden behind paywalls, or you have to have a password to get in. Things like your online banking or your subscription to the New York Times, a lot of government databases, that's called the deep web. And then a very small chunk of the deep web is what people call the dark web. And what distinguishes the dark web from everything else out there on the internet is the communications are all anonymous. It's created so that nobody can track who you are when you go into the dark web. You cannot find out who has posted things on the dark web that you're reading and that you're responding to. So it's an anonymity type of program that was created back in the late 90s for what's called internet privacy.
Okay. Well, now, since nobody can see and know things, who pays for it?
Well, initially, as it was created, it was funded by the U.S. government and also by some governments overseas, as these groups would try to create these internet privacy vectors, these programs. And the U.S. government's intention when they developed their program back in the late 90s was to facilitate communications between intelligence agencies and people in other countries who were their information sources. They wanted to be able to have those reports come in anonymously so that their sources would not be spotted and captured and punished. And they also hoped that it would facilitate whistleblowing, both in private corporations and in government agencies of wrongdoing that was going on. And then finally, it was hoped that these types of programs would enable people who are in the pro-democracy movements in countries that had dictatorships running them to be able to speak to one another, to speak to the people generally, to speak to people in the West, and also to access news sources in the West that had been blocked by those governments. So those were the three big reasons why the government funded this type of project back in the late 90s.
So it started as something good, but then moved into something with a lot of bad things like money laundering and human trafficking and drug and gun sales and all of that?
It did. It's eventually moved into that. The U.S. government released the software for a major program that allows you to surf the dark web called Tor. And Tor was released as an open software program back in 2002. And that sort of began the people's access to the dark web back then. And then around 2008, 2009, this Tor project, as it was called, which became a private nonprofit program, came up with a sort of a software app that you could get in. With that, easily you could surf the dark web and communicate confidentially with all these people. And that coincided with the release of Bitcoin, the oncoming of Bitcoin, where people could actually pay for things anonymously. So you had both sides of the equation there, where you could offer things like criminal products or services, and also get them paid for anonymously, and nobody could really track what was going on. It was just it turned in many respects into sort of a criminal enterprise, marketplace bazaar, whatever you want to call it. And about half of all the transactions, all of the surfing of the dark web that was done turned out to become these criminal transactions. And that really started in earnest about 10 to 12 years ago.
Yeah, in the little I know about it, I've heard that the fraudsters can buy all sorts of information about us.
They can. And even in the late 90s, when we were trying to track down people involved in the elder fraud industry, the people who would call you and tell you you had won the sweepstakes in Hong Kong or Australia or something like that, we could spot on the internet where they were offering and selling and buying the names of people who had fallen for sweepstakes scams in the past, or even had simply signed up for American Family Publishers sweepstakes or Reader's Digest sweepstakes in years past. These were people who were considered vulnerable to these types of scams, and people were selling that openly on the internet. And so when the dark web came along, it made it even easier to buy and sell information on people who were vulnerable to certain scams. And it quickly grew to where they were selling profiles of people who probably would be easily subjected to sweetheart scams, grandchildren scams. They would sell profiles of the grandkids and the grandparents. And just about any other scam that targets seniors, you could buy information. You could buy lists of potential victims, including people who were or are taking Alzheimer's type drugs such as Aricept.
Really?
That is bought and sold on the dark web these days.
So the idea of any privacy anymore is pretty much out the window.
It's pretty scary. All of that. It's scary what's out there, on the dark web, about each of us. Whenever there's some sort of security breach, that information is quickly conveyed onto the dark web and offered for sale, and is bought and sold and resold. And there are plenty of people in the world who want to buy that information, and they'll use their Bitcoin accounts to pay for it anonymously.
And I thought Bitcoins were not a real thing, but apparently they're real things. I mean, I was reading something about the problems. I forgot what mineral they use, but anyway, this is beyond my imagination how it works.
Yeah, and I'm not a Bitcoin expert. We probably could reserve that for another program, but it does have a physical aspect to it, but also a lot of the transactions are just done online. And again, they're done anonymously. So it makes it very easy for criminal enterprises to use the dark web, and using it more and more from what we can tell.
Yeah, I'd heard at a presentation I was able to go to that they can buy like your social security number for a couple dollars, or pretty much all of your personal information for $35. I mean, it's just amazing. Well, that brings up the question, how do we protect ourselves?
Well, you really can't protect yourself too much over what's out there being sold back and forth on the dark web.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't just intervene and stop it. It's very difficult to get government agencies to go and grab those people because, again, everything's anonymous. And occasionally some of them will get busted because you've filed a complaint with this Federal Trade Commission or the North Carolina Attorney General's office, but that is very, very rare. The main way to protect yourself is through all the online privacy tips that you've heard and received over the years, and all the techniques that you employ to make sure you don't share your passwords or your Social Security or Medicare number with anyone, and also to check your credit reports online as often as you can. And there's a special website you can link into at the Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov site, and you can get your annual credit report from each of the 3 credit reporting services free. You can go to the first one, and then 4 months later, you can go to the second one, and after that, go to the third one. And so all year long, you can just keep checking your credit report. Then you will be able to see, at least if somebody has stolen or bought your identity or some of your sensitive information online through the dark web and is using it. The other thing to be mindful of, and this is one of these things where it's more of a do what I say, not what I do, because I don't change my passwords very often. I do it very sparingly, and I need to do it more often. But really, to protect yourself against what's out there on the dark web, you should change your passwords for all these programs that you're involved in, or get one of these special programs that automatically changes your password itself. So it's basically the good old-fashioned tips that we've all been hearing for the last 8 or 10 years on protecting your identity, protecting your financial accounts.
You know, as you were talking about, they can go in and see, what medications you're taking, or if you've subscribed to Match.com or something. But then people get re-victimized, where they find out can you say a little bit more about that? Because that's pretty amazing.
One of the things we talk about in my book, Elder Fraud Wars, and we dealt with every day in the Attorney General's office, the repeat victimization phenomenon for seniors. And so whatever scam you're running, if you're running it against a senior, you can probably run it again after you've got the first round of money from them. You just reload them, as the criminals say. You reload them, you come back with a second iteration of the same scam. And it can be like a home repair. They've lied to you about your chimney being about to fall down. And then second iteration, they'll say, oh, your roof is all rotted. And they'll go on and on with all these imaginary things that are supposedly wrong with your house. So with these online scams, or with these sweepstakes scams, they're going to keep telling you, oh, you've won even more. Or you have to pay the insurance. Now that you've already paid us the taxes, you have to pay us an insurance fee. Or now that you paid the insurance fee, there's still a problem. You have to be audited by the Department of Homeland Security to make sure this money isn't related to terrorism. They've always got something to come back with you on. And they always use the information about you that they bought via the dark web.
Well, I have also heard about ones where somebody comes on and said, gee, we heard you got scammed. Let me help you get your money back.
Yes.
And have you got examples of that?
Oh, we've had several of those over the years. And that's usually like the 10th or 11th iteration of some of these scams. Somebody will come on and say, Ms. Batra, we realize that you have been ripped off by this company, the sweepstakes company in Toronto, Canada, 8 different times. And I'm a lawyer who has shut this company down. We've got all their assets frozen, and we want to get your money to you. All we need you to do is pay my retainer fee and then start paying some of these taxes and insurance fees all over again, and we'll get your money to you. And so that's called a reload. And it's also called a recovery scam because it's usually a lawyer or a phony lawyer or phony government agent claiming that they've taken this company down and they're going to get all your money to you right away.
Let's go back a second to poking around in the dark web. I have to admit that I did Google dark web and looked at a few things, and then I had been talking to somebody that worked for the Secret Service. He said, don't do that. But talk a little bit more about our personal curiosity around that, about how to protect yourself and what you could do and what you really shouldn't do.
Well, to be able to go on the dark web, you have to get one of these apps or special programs that will let you in. And the most popular one is from the Tor project. Torproject.org is their website, and Tor is T-O-R, and it stands for the Onion Router. And the Onion Router is what these American scientists came up with in the late 90s to allow you to surf the dark web or go throughout the dark web. And so you can download the Tor app, and that will enable you to get into the dark web. There are a couple of other apps that are out there. The Freenet app and the I2P app will also let you do it. But the most popular, most versatile one that I understand is the Tor app. And when you go into the dark web using the Tor app, you also need to take various precautions. Like you need to make sure that whatever security system you have on your computer is up to date and it's firing away, and you're really good with it. You probably want to use a virtual private network if you can. And there are a couple of things, like you need to turn off JavaScript, because otherwise, if you have it on, it's going to expose your whole identity to whoever's there lurking there in the dark web with you. So there's a lot of things you got to be very careful with just to get into it. And then you have to be careful what you click onto when you're surfing around there in the dark web. And some of these things are very benign programs. Like the New York Times has their own special dark web site for people who live in these countries like Iran or China or wherever, where the government might not want them, reading the New York Times. And you could also see a special Facebook program there, where it's also designed for people like that, so they can get into Facebook and communicate with one another. But then you might click on something that could seem very benign, but what it is the same old problem you have on the regular internet. You've clicked on a site that's installing malware on your computer, and it's doing it right away. You could inadvertently go onto say a child porn website, or a website where you buy or sell sexual slaves or human trafficking. And these websites might have already been infiltrated by law enforcement. And they're going to be wondering, what are you doing, Gretchen, on this website? And coming to ask you some tough questions. But the experts that I've sat with as they've gone into the dark web and surfed around have just said, you just got to be very careful when you're going into any of these websites at all. So,
based on what you're saying, Dave, I think I'm not, there are areas I don't want to even bother to be curious about. It just sounds too dangerous to even go there.
Yeah.
Because as you say, you can inadvertently fall into the wrong one. It sounds benign. Yeah. Well,
privacy, surfing privately on the internet is a big concern for a lot of people. And a lot of them will get this Tor app and use it to surf regular websites, which you can do. And nobody will know who you are. But there are other ways to do that. You can also just, click on an incognito window and start surfing with Google or some other program that you already have, and it makes it harder for people to see who you are. Whatever website you go to, you're not going to get all the spam emails from them or things popping up as you're surfing other sites. And so you can do that, or you can use another program like Freenet. That will enable you to surf anonymously on the web. But mainly, I think about half of the people who are on the dark web are who are on this program, the torproject.org program, are actually trying to surf anonymously, and they're not looking for some of these more criminal aspects of the dark web or the regular internet.
Okay, well, this is intriguing. Well, we've had a few questions come in, so let's see what's on people's minds. Okay, is it worth the cost to invest in identity theft insurance?
That's a tough question. I personally don't feel the need to, but others might feel like just checking their credit report every now and then is not going to be enough. And so having identity theft insurance for them is a good idea. Especially they can let the identity theft insurance company be proactive and start looking for things that would threaten them or threaten their safety on the internet or the safety of their personal information. They also, a lot of these insurance programs will actually pay to help you clean up things that have gotten out there, things that are your personal financial information or the bad credit reports that have resulted from somebody using your name.
So it sounds like that's a personal choice.
Yes. So being a lawyer, I guess I feel I can do that myself, so I don't do it.
Whoops.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen's understudy, so maybe she's having a little bit of technical difficulties here. She had some great additional questions for you, David. One of those that I was interested in was about ransomware and the relationship between ransomware, how it's tied to the dark web. And maybe you already covered that. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about that?
Well, ransomware is one of the parade of imaginary and real horribles that are out there on the internet. If you get into it, you can find sites offering all these other things that we've talked about, and also ransomware. If you wanted to have somebody's computer infected with ransomware, there's somebody there on the dark web who will do it. And
wow.
the people who do the ransomware will also just do it on their own, and they rely upon information that they can purchase on the dark web about you to get into your computer, to find your IP address, to find other avenues of getting in there. And sometimes the ransomware is real. They really can shut down your computer. Sometimes it's just fake. They're just pretending that you owe money and they're going to shut down your computer and just hoping you'll pay. But either way, it's a terrifying thing to deal with, and it's made possible by the dark web.
So it is what it sounds like. It really is a form of ransom. Thank you for that connection. And here's another question that popped up I saw, and it's about the VPN, and I think that's an interesting question. Can you explain more about the VPN and the relationship between that and the dark web?
Well, a VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and you can get it maybe through your own internet service provider. You can get it through your software security program if you have Norton or McAfee, which we were discussing Mr. McAfee a while ago. A lot of these services will offer you free VPN. And then you can also purchase VPN services straight off the internet. And what that will do is further enable you to communicate, especially over Wi-Fi networks, in a way that's totally secure, that nobody can tell who you are. Nobody can, get into your computer as you're sitting in the airport and surfing away or sending emails. So it's a very good program to have, especially if you're dealing with sensitive information or you just don't want people to get in and learn about you.
I'm back. Hi. I just wanted to go back to the credit reporting right now and take it till the end of April. Apparently, you can get your credit reports every week because of COVID and the increase in cyber fraud. So it's available more frequently right now. And then you can also put a credit freeze. That's another thing you really want to think about doing if you don't need immediate credit, to put a credit freeze on all of the three businesses so that nobody can come in and get credit in your name. But there's also the credit alert. Can you speak to that, Dave?
Well, a lot of the credit alerts that are offered by these companies will let you know anytime somebody has tried to open credit in your name or done a credit search in your name, and that's often good to know. And that's yet another tool in your toolbox in protecting yourself against all these things that are lurking out there in the dark web. But I firmly believe in credit report freezes. Deborah and I have gotten ours frozen for about 5 years now. We've never had a problem. You can always lift the freeze when you need to go and open a new account. It's just very simple to deal with, and it really foils all these awful people out there on the internet who are wanting to scam you.
Right. And the big deal is to keep track of your PIN number because if you know your PIN number, you can take the freeze off. If you need credit, you can take your freeze off and very quickly. Otherwise, you have to do right, and it takes a couple of days. So keep track of that PIN number. But yeah, we've been encouraging people to do the freeze for a long time. And even though I was cheerfully encouraging people to do it, I didn't do it until a few years ago. So, it's like, do what I say, not what I do. But I finally followed my own advice. Okay, well, we've got a couple more questions here. How effective are the free VPNs?
I'm really not an expert on which VPNs are better than others. I just sort of have this natural impulse that the one you're paying for are going to be better because you're paying for it. You have a little bit more of a legal liability hook on them if their program doesn't really work that well. If it's just free, you really don't. There's not much you can do about it.
That's the lawyer speaking, right?
That's lawyer talk. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. And then, can you delete your stuff from the dark web?
From what I've seen, you cannot. If it's out there, it's on there. You can't delete it.
Yeah, that's why we're just encouraging people to be so careful. And unfortunately, cyber fraud is increasing. I mean, I think we're just going to keep seeing more and more increase and more creativity around that. Well, in our few minutes before we wind up, have you got any other things that we didn't cover, Dave, that you want to put in?
Just to get back to how certain things on the dark web are positive. 10 years ago, we all remember the so-called Arab Spring when all these uprisings broke out across Northern Africa and the Middle East. And that was generated by the dark web, by these positive things that are on the dark web. And some people think the WikiLeaks thing was great. It ripped the curtain over the various things the government was doing. That too was a dark web event. And so Edward Snowden, his whistleblowing, that was all part of the dark web. So all these other things like the Silk Road drug emporium and the sex trafficking things, those are still there. They're still going strong, not Silk Road itself, but all these new variations of that. They're still going strong. So the last I saw, it's still sort of a 60-40, 50-50 balance of good things that can still be done on the internet versus the bad and horrible things.
Okay, yeah. So it's good to know. I mean, every solution has a problem, and I guess that's what's happened. And Dave, so people can, if they want to email you, there's your information about your email address. And as we wind up next week, we will be having Helen Savage on, and she will be talking about stories that have come in to the Fraud Watch Network. Every week, we encourage you to sign up for the Fraud Watch Network, where you get 2 emails or text messages a month. And also, if you run into a fraud, you can call the number. It's on your screen right now. And you get to talk to a real person. And Helen is one of the people that follows up for when people call in and talk to them about what happened to them and how to protect themselves in the future. And to be honest, she's got some amazing stories of the frauds that people have encountered. So we're going to be talking about our AARP Fraud Watch Network and what she's learned as she's talked to individuals trying to help them with the problems that they have. So And that'll be the last one in the series of 6 that we've done this winter. And we'll be back in a few months with more of these webinars. And Dave's coming back, and he's going to be talking about robocalls, something that he's got probably in the country the most expertise in. You've won some big cases there, right, Dave?
I have many cases, and one of the biggest court judgments against robocallers and do not call violators. So yeah, I'll be glad to talk about that when time comes.
Okay, super. And I know a lot of you will be back to learn about that because they drive us nuts. I think every day there's certain ones that I get every day. I don't answer the phone unless I just feel people are going to leave a message if they really want to talk to me. I don't answer the phone because I've even gotten calls from my own phone number. So you just can't trust. We don't want to scare people, but boy, we keep talking about be very careful what you trust. So we're going to wind up for today, and thanks, Dave, so very much for helping explore the dark web. So apparently, or hopefully, it's taken some of the mystery out of it. But again, we really want you to be cautious. So we'll see you again in a few months, Dave. And for the rest of you, tune back in next week when we have Helen Savage talking about stories from our own AARP Fraud Watch Network. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Bye-bye.